The moment he stepped into the mansion, his breath left him like a confession ripped from his chest. The walls were higher than any hope he had carried in years, the floors polished enough to reflect the face of a man who no longer recognized himself. And then he saw it, hung in a golden frame, glowing softly under museum lights, a portrait he knew better than his own reflection. It was his wife, the woman he had buried, mourned, and loved through hunger and heartbreak. Her face stared back at him from a billionaire's mansion, unchanged by time, as if the past had been waiting for him to finally arrive. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that find us when we are at our lowest, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that life can still surprise us. He was a poor single father, though the word poor hardly captured the weight he carried. Poverty was not just the empty fridge or the worn shoes he taped together for one more month. It was the constant arithmetic of survival, the way every decision was measured against his children's needs, the silent guilt of nights when he could not give them more than love and promises. After his wife's death, the world had narrowed to school runs, late-night shifts, and whispered prayers that tomorrow would be kinder. He worked wherever hands were needed, warehouses, construction sites, delivery routes, never staying long enough to be remembered, always leaving before hope could settle in. The invitation to the mansion came by accident, or so it seemed. A temporary job, a single day of work helping move old artwork for a wealthy collector who was renovating his estate. The pay was more than he usually made in a week, enough to fix the heater and buy his daughter the books she pretended she didn't need. He told himself it was just work, just another long day under someone else's roof. He did not know he was walking into the center of his own unfinished story. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a memory vault. Every hallway carried echoes of lives lived loudly and luxuriously, while his own footsteps sounded small and apologetic. He moved carefully, aware of his worn clothes against marble walls, trying to disappear into the task. That was when he noticed the portrait. At first, it was only a familiar curve of a smile, the softness around the eyes that had once watched him fall asleep on a borrowed couch. Then it became undeniable. The woman in the frame was the same woman who had held his hand in hospital corridors, who had laughed through poverty, who had whispered plans for a future they never reached. His chest tightened as memories flooded back with merciless clarity. Yeah, he remembered the way she had painted in the evenings, cheap brushes and canvases balanced on their kitchen table. She had talent, the kind that startled people, but life never gave them room to dream. When she fell ill, art supplies were sold to pay bills. When she died, he kept only one small sketch she had made of their children, folded and hidden like a relic. Seeing her immortalized in oil and gold felt like discovering a life she had lived without him, a secret written on the walls of someone else's fortune. Confusion turned to something sharper, something that felt like betrayal, even though he could not name who had betrayed whom. How did her image end up here? Why was it treated like a treasure when he had watched her fade in a small, cold apartment? The question burned in him as he continued working, his hands shaking, his thoughts unraveling. Every glance at the portrait reopened wounds he thought time had closed. The billionaire who owned the mansion was known for his silence. A man who collected rare art and rarer stories, who moved through the world untouched by ordinary grief. When their paths finally crossed in the gallery room, the air shifted. The single father stood there, smaller than ever, weighed down by years of unasked questions. He did not plan to speak. He did not plan to confront anyone, but grief has its own gravity, and it pulled the truth out of him. What followed was not an explosion, not anger or denial, but something far more unsettling. The billionaire did not dismiss him. He did not mock his confusion. Instead, his face changed, as if a door long sealed had been forced open. The mansion, the art, the fortune, all of it seemed to fade as the past rose between them. Years earlier, before illness and poverty closed in, the single father's wife had crossed paths with a man who recognized her talent immediately. She had shown him her work, not to seek wealth, but because she believed art should be seen. When her health declined, she made a decision that would alter everything. She sold the rights to her paintings quietly, using the money to cover medical costs and to ensure her family would survive a little longer without drowning in debt. She asked for anonymity. She asked that her husband never be burdened with knowing what she had given up or what she had left behind. The billionaire had kept his promise. He collected her work, preserved it, and displayed it not as an investment, but as a tribute. The portrait was not a symbol of ownership. It was a monument to a woman who had loved fiercely and sacrificed completely. Hearing this truth did not erase the pain, but it reshaped it. Grief shifted from confusion to understanding, from bitterness to a quiet, aching pride. For the single father, the revelation was overwhelming. He had spent years believing his wife's life ended in loss. Now he saw that even in her final days, she had been building something beautiful, something that reached beyond their struggle. The mansion no longer felt like an enemy space. It felt like a strange extension of her love, a place where her spirit had been protected when he could not protect anything else. The change did not stop at understanding. The billionaire, moved by the collision of past and present, offered something unexpected. Not charity, not pity, but opportunity. He ensured the single father's children would have access to education without fear of cost. He opened doors that had been permanently closed, not as a favor, but as a continuation of the promise he had made to their mother. The poor single dad did not suddenly become rich, but he became something far more powerful, secure. Life did not transform overnight into a fairy tale. There were still early mornings, still tired bones, and long days. But there was also breathing room. There was the ability to say yes to school trips, to replace broken shoes without panic, to plan for a future instead of merely surviving the present. Most importantly, there was healing. The children grew up knowing their mother not as a tragedy, but as an artist whose love had reached further than she ever knew. Years later, the single father would stand again before that portrait, this time without trembling. He would see not just the woman he lost, but the strength she carried quietly. He would understand that some sacrifices are invisible, that love sometimes writes itself into places we never expect. The mansion no longer symbolized distance between worlds. It symbolized a bridge built by one woman's courage. Just before this story ends, take a moment to comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what part of this journey moved you the most. Your words mean more than you know. Near the end of his journey, the single father realized something profound. Wealth did not define the value of a life. Recognition did not require fame. His wife had been poor by society's standards, yet she left behind a legacy that changed lives, including his own. Standing in the quiet glow of that gallery, he finally felt at peace, not because the past made sense, but because it mattered. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can echo long after loss, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and leave a heartfelt comment. Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who may be standing at the edge of their own unanswered questions, waiting for a moment that changes everything. The days that followed did not feel real at first. Life had a way of resisting sudden kindness, as if the soul needed time to believe it was allowed to rest. The single father returned to his small apartment that evening, carrying the weight of revelation like fragile glass. His children were asleep when he arrived, faces soft and unaware, and he stood there longer than usual, watching them breathe. For years, he had lived inside survival mode, where reflection was a luxury he could not afford. That night, memories moved freely. He remembered his wife's quiet smiles when she thought no one was watching, the way she hid exhaustion behind humor, the way she loved with an intensity that never asked for applause. Seeing her portrait had torn open old wounds, but now those wounds were stitched with meaning. In the weeks that followed, changes came slowly, deliberately, like sunrise after a long polar night. Letters arrived that he read twice to make sure they were real, confirmations of scholarships, medical coverage, and support systems that did not feel like charity, but like fulfillment of a promise. The billionaire never inserted himself loudly into their lives. There were no press stories, no dramatic announcements. Everything was handled quietly, respectfully, as if the past deserved dignity rather than spectacle. This silence mattered more than any grand gesture. It told the single father that his wife's wish for anonymity had been honored even now. The children sensed the shift before they understood it. Stress leaves fingerprints on a household, and when it lifts, even slightly, rooms feel larger. Mornings were no longer rushed with panic. Evenings were no longer shadowed by unpaid bills. Their father laughed more easily, not because pain had vanished, but because hope had finally been allowed to exist beside it. He spoke of their mother often now, not with the tight voice of someone afraid of breaking, but with warmth. He told them about her art, about how she saw beauty in ordinary things, about how she believed that kindness should outlive hardship. One afternoon, months later, he was invited back to the mansion, not as labor, but as family. Walking through those doors again felt different. The space no longer dwarfed him, it welcomed him. He stood once more before the portrait, this time with his children beside him. They stared at the painting with quiet awe, recognizing their mother's eyes, her softness, her strength. In that moment, the past and the future overlapped. Grief did not disappear, but it transformed into something gentler, something survivable. The billionaire shared the rest of the story through actions rather than words. He funded an art foundation in her name, one that supported unknown artists struggling at the margins of society. He made sure the foundation focused on people who created not for fame, but because creation was the only way they knew how to breathe. The single father watched this unfold with humility. His wife's life, once confined to hospital rooms and small apartments, now rippled outward, touching strangers she would never meet. Years passed. The children grew taller, more confident, shaped by stability rather than scarcity. The single father found work that respected his time and dignity, and for the first time, he allowed himself to dream beyond tomorrow. He did not forget where he came from. He volunteered at shelters, spoke to other parents drowning in the same quiet fear he once carried. He never told his story to inspire envy, only to remind others that unseen sacrifices still matter. Sometimes, late at night, he would unfold the small sketch his wife had left behind, the one he had protected through every move and hardship. He would place it beside a photograph of the portrait in the mansion, seeing the contrast between simplicity and grandeur, realizing that both held equal truth. Love, he learned, does not need witnesses to be real. It simply needs to endure. As the years softened the sharpest edges of loss, he came to understand the unbelievable truth hidden inside that first shocking moment. His wife had not disappeared into poverty and illness. She had expanded beyond them. Her life had intersected with power and wealth, not to be consumed by them, but to quietly redirect them toward compassion. And through her choices, she had saved her family in ways she could never explain. Just before the end of this story, take a moment to leave a comment below and share what this journey reminded you of. A loved one, a sacrifice, or a moment when truth changed everything. In the end, the single father no longer asked why his wife's photo was in a billionaire's mansion. He knew the answer lived in every act of love she had left behind. And as he watched his children step into a future she had protected with her final strength, he understood that some legacies are not measured in money or fame, but in the quiet, unbelievable ways they keep the people we love alive